monologue of lies or dropping truths. In my view, it's the same script of lies. Policymakers have lost the ability to reason, literally sold their countries for a song. Or should I say, the ability to reason has been overtaken by greed. Do you care for some truthful journalism? What happened to human rights, freedom of speech, free to choose what you want and what you don't want? Did you just cut me off?
What is government doing about that?
Did they just cut me off?
Blacks should
At what point did they cut me off? Lest I remind you, we are at war. This is Worldview. Welcome to the show and thank you for joining me. I'm Yvonne Katsande. So there has been the ongoing headline of the anti-war rallies happening in Europe. And also coming up on the February 19th of this month, that will be in Washington, D.C. Now, why are people coming up with an anti-war rally? We've seen this happen many a times in the years past, in recent times also. But this one particularly because of the Russia-Ukraine war. No one really wants to go to war. But I'll give you an example of such. In 1969, Washington hosted the largest anti-war protest in U.S. history. 500,000 demonstrators converged on Washington on that 15th day of November of 1969 to show their growing disdain for America's involvement in the Vietnam War, for what's believed to be the largest anti-war protest in U.S. history. And it was called the Moratorium March. So the protests in Washington and around the country were building as the Vietnam War ground on. Students for Democratic Society staged the first major anti-war rally in Washington, and that was on April 17th of 1965. With about 20,000 people attending this orderly event, it wasn't violent. Fast forward to 1969, and the historic November rallies were part of a string of demonstrations that took place around the world, with groups from San Francisco to Boston and London petitioning for peace. Thousands of others involved in the anti-war movement joined affiliated protests in cities and, of course, on college campuses across the country, including a march through San Francisco that attracted 30,000. Today, we are talking about an orchestrated war between Russia and Ukraine. Well, sadly, of course, with a globalist agenda. And just like in 1969, again, we see different countries joining in the war. For example, locals took to the streets of Nuremberg in Germany with drums and banner reading, "We are the red line," meaning that they just don't want this war. Other countries in Europe have also joined in the anti-war rallies happening. Now, let me take you back to October the 29th of 2022, when an anti-war advocate asked Obama about his role in the Ukraine war at a Michigan rally. Well, listen to this.
You overthrew Ukraine in 2014! You overthrew the legitimate Ukraine in 2014! Tell us about your plans for nuclear war with Russia! Stop provoking nuclear war with Russia! You're going to kill us with nuclear war! Russia's the enemy! Russia is not the enemy! Russia's the enemy! Stop getting us into nuclear war with Russia! No nuclear war! Victorian Nuland financed the overthrow!
Mr. President, there's more people that are going to get hurt if we go into nuclear war. Right now, we're on the verge of nuclear war thanks to what you did in Ukraine in 2014. Why won't you tell the truth about what you did to overthrow Ukraine in 2014? Will you tell the truth? Will you tell the truth?
There is a process that we set up in our democracy.
Yeah, but we're on the verge of nuclear war. Do you care about the lives of your supporters? Will you tell the truth before the world walks into World War? The coup of 2014 is on your doorstep. You were the one that allowed for a radical
Well, literally nobody really listening to what Obama had to say at that time. Now, the situation certainly is not favoring Ukraine, as Zelensky is getting desperate to the point of sending even young children to war, as seen in this footage. Now, Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya, whose troops are fighting for Moscow in Ukraine, has reportedly said that the war will end by the end of the year, with Russian forces prevailing. An ally of Vladimir Putin, Kadyrov, has criticized Russian commanders and aspects of the Kremlin's military campaign in Ukraine, that is, without exactly condemning the Russian president directly. But despite months of downbeat assessments of Russia's military prowess, he still suggested that Russia would win the war, which would end by the end of this year. Then he believed that European countries would recognize the wrongness of their actions. That's a very interesting comment. But let me just show you one of the European countries and their leader and what they had to say. So here we go. Polish Prime Minister Morawiecki says Poland is ready to take joint responsibility for the formation of a new world order. Poland is ready to become one of the key links of a post-imperial Europe. So when is the United States leaving? Have a listen.
Tymczasem Zachód walkę o wolność zamienił na kontrakty z rosyjską oligarchią. Mówimy często o uzależnieniu Europy od rosyjskich surowców i faktycznie Putin działał trochę jak dealer narkotykowy, a dealer pierwszą dawkę zawsze daje za darmo albo bardzo tanio, po to, żeby uzależnić, po to, żeby uzależniony przyszedł po więcej i zgodził się na każdą cenę. To, że Europa z taką łatwością dała się uwieść Rosji, nie wynika tylko z demonicznych zdolności Putina i Rosji, ale przede wszystkim ze słabości samej Europy. Stoimy przed jasnym wyborem: albo zwycięstwo Rosji i klęska Zachodu, albo renesans zachodniej cywilizacji. Ten czas, dzisiejszy czas, można też nazwać czasem walki o wyobraźnię, walki o nowy światowy porządek. Polska jest gotowa wziąć na siebie współodpowiedzialność za kształtowanie nowego ładu światowego. Polska jest gotowa, by stać się jednym z kluczowych ogniw
So they're actually admitting that they're ready for the new world order. The present time can be called the time for struggle, for a new world order. Poland is ready to take joint responsibility for the formation of this new world order.
Stoimy przed jasnym wyborem: albo zwycięstwo Rosji i klęska Zachodu, albo renesans zachodniej cywilizacji. Ten czas, dzisiejszy czas, można też nazwać czasem walki o wyobraźnię, walki o nowy światowy porządek. Polska jest gotowa wziąć na siebie współodpowiedzialność za kształtowanie nowego ładu światowego. Polska jest gotowa, by stać się jednym z kluczowych ogniw postimperialnej Europy.
Oh, so let me remind you, we are praying for inspiring leadership, right? But right now, introducing Diane Sear, a member of the Schiller Institute. I have interviewed Diane, well, I actually interviewed her late last year, and at that time she was running for the US Senate against Chuck Schumer. Now she has jumped right back into the fire, so to speak, as a senatorial candidate against the other senator representing New York State, that's Kirsten Gillibrand. Diane's current campaign is putting a spotlight on the billions of US dollars and armaments being supplied to Ukraine and the increased danger of the nuclear war. Now, while issuing these warnings, Diane continues to be a leading spokeswoman for peace through development. Diane, once again, it's good to have you on the show, and thank you for joining me on Worldview.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I'm glad to be here with you.
All right, so we continue on this issue, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, United States. And so you have now come out to announce, together with some other members, that you're going to go on an anti-war rally come February the 19th. So tell us more about that.
Well, I'm really pleased the way it's working, and I think in no small part, because the leadership of it is of a new generation. The two rally conveners, Nick Brana and Angela McArdle. Nick Brana of the People's Party, the chairman of the People's Party, and Angela McArdle is the chair of the National Committee of the Libertarian Party, are both, I think, below 35. And they're very determined to create a future, and they're not obsessed with the kinds of petty disagreements that should keep people divided, or even significant disagreements, which, as you might imagine, the libertarian, which is completely free trade, laissez-faire economics, versus the People's Party, which would consider themselves, I suppose, socialist. So those are substantial disagreements, but they said, look, we are facing a nuclear war. We're calling on men and women of goodwill. The world has to know, the Congress has to know that the American people do not approve of $100 billion worth of weapons being sent to the most corrupt country in Europe, which has a neo-Nazi problem, to wage a proxy war with Russia. And I will add that the people suffering the most in this are the people of Ukraine. They've lost, I don't know, I've heard different estimates from 130,000 to 350,000 troops. You now have a big problem of suicide. What are they going to gain from being the foot soldiers of a NATO operation to destroy Russia? So it's really quite hideous. So the lineup of speakers is very impressive. Jimmy Dore, for people there who don't know, he's a very popular, maybe a lot of you do know him, YouTuber who has over 1 million followers. He's a comedian, and perhaps that's why he's been able, he's like the Joker in a Shakespeare play, who's able to get out really burning words of truth in an ironic fashion. So he's managed to be quite like the chorus throughout this drama. Then you have former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, former U.S. Senator Ron Paul, former U.S. Congresswoman and presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, Kim Iverson, Scott Ritter, many noteworthy people, myself included, as speakers at this event. And I think it's quite impressive that they pulled it together. They have a list of demands. It's actually not merely against arming Ukraine, although that's number one, but they are calling for things like stopping hyperinflation, cutting the defense budget, and their final demand is freedom for Julian Assange.
Wow. So I did make reference to 1969. One anti-war protest that was regarded one of the the largest in U.S. history. How many people are you expecting to participate in this rally come February the 19th?
I think it's really almost impossible to tell. I have no idea. Unfortunately, the events of January 6th were used to create a hysteria and terror. So I think a lot of people are very afraid to go out in the streets. And there's also a lot of dissension being provoked by Twitter bots and intelligence agencies against the rally. But they're reminding me of the boy who called wolf, because they're slandering. So I just read an article that attacks me, Jackson Hinkle, Tulsi Gabbard, and Ron Paul. Tulsi Gabbard and myself are supposedly leaders of nefarious cults. Ron Paul is a right-wing something or other, and Jackson Hinkle is a racist I mean, it's just crazy. The problem is they've now called so many of us names that people who used to be terrified to associate with Lyndon LaRouche, for example, because of everything that was thrown at LaRouche, are now saying, well, I just got called the same thing. So who cares? Are you for or against nuclear war?
This is their own anti-war against you, actually. That's what we're saying. It's an anti-war against an anti-war. Very interesting, but also expected of such people, you know, the globalists, the CIA, the FBI, just to try and silence you. But in all this, are you expecting a favorable outcome? I'll tell you why I ask. During the anti-war of 1969, the Nixon administration reaffirmed that its Vietnam policy would not be determined by marchers on the streets and asserted its course continues to have the support of most Americans. Now, will the Biden administration be any different?
That's a very good question. You know, I made myself watch parts of Biden's State of the Union address last night.
We all did, actually, yeah.
Ugh. Once again, I found myself being disturbed not so much by him, but by the Congress. They are an embarrassment. This is like the Roman bread and circuses. You know, I don't know who they gave more standing ovations to, Volodymyr Zelensky or Joe Biden, for saying things that are equally untrue. I was sort of wondering, what country Biden was talking about with his 12 million new jobs and the great industrial recovery. I don't see any signs of that here. So I think he will be inclined to not be responsive. However, it is possible to move the Congress, and we saw that with some of my younger associates, and also you played the intervention by some others out in Michigan when Obama was there. But a couple of my young campaign volunteers and LaRouche organizers intervened in a town hall meeting on AOC and said, we voted for you. They were from the Bronx. We voted for you because you said you were anti-war, you were going to change things, and here you voted to fund every single nickel to Ukraine. You're a fraud. We're afraid of nuclear war. That's the number one issue. That video of their intervention went viral. It went all over the place.
Yeah.
Literally the next day, 30 members of Congress wrote a letter, very mild, saying, we totally approve of you sending all these weapons, but couldn't you at least try for negotiations? I mean, it was literally that mild. Couldn't you mix a little negotiations with the weapons,
Wow.
Even that was so offensive.
Yeah.
That they were forced, or I shouldn't say forced, whatever threats were levied against them, they revoked the entire letter within 24 hours.
I was actually about to ask the question, why do they sound as though they are being apologetic or they don't want to offend somebody? I mean, we're talking about a possible nuclear threat here. That's deep.
Of course. Of course. Look, I think you really have to go back. The Schiller Institute, as you may know, recently over the Martin Luther King birthday weekend sponsored a panel on the assassinations that occurred not just here, but all over the world. And in fact, Mr. LaRouche used to talk about a wave that began with the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in 1961, but then going through, Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, also the 30 attempts to assassinate Charles de Gaulle, later Enrico Mattei, the bankers in Germany who were working to reunify Germany with an industrial agreement with the East, Herrhausen and Rohwedder were assassinated. So what you have clearly is an assassination bureau. And since the truth was never told, I mean, the Warren Commission was simply a cover-up, probably written by some of the people, perhaps Alan Dulles, who would have been involved in making sure the assassination of Kennedy came off. So I think there's an enormous amount of fear, and the United States has to purge itself of this treasonous faction. They're not elected, they operate in the darkness, they operate by fear, and we need people to not bow down to them. And that's what I think is coming together in this rally. That's what because the kind of things that people have been called, the name calling going on now, I can tell you even 3 years ago, half the participants would have dropped out.
Wow.
Now they're fighting back.
Interesting. So I have a question that I always find very important in actual fact, especially when you have such big events like this. Is the church going to be a part of this rally? Did you involve any church for you to, for maybe guidance or maybe just advice on how they can also be a part of this? Because you also want this to be peaceful, effective, but very peaceful.
Yes. I don't know. I'm not one of the key people organizing the rally, although I'm bringing people in. And as you know, the Schiller Institute has picked up on this initiative of Pope Francis, who has offered the Vatican as a meeting place for negotiations with no preconditions between Ukraine and Russia, which is a very important offer. The Vatican has played a role throughout history, and many people are not aware the Vatican has been in the middle of negotiating the prisoner exchanges right now. So there's a reason to why they could be a trusted host for this. And there are many groups like Pax Christi, the Catholic Peace Organization, who are supporting that, who are out having vigils and other demonstrations, and which I think will be fed into this rally. I'm not aware at the moment of a specific church role, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
All right. Okay, so speaking of Western support for Ukraine, Ukraine finally got some Leopard 2 battle tanks from Poland and from Canada. Why now? And how much of a difference will they really make on the battlefield, if any?
None. They'll be what Scott Ritter calls expensive metal coffins. They're not going to change the battle conditions.
Yeah.
It's too, I mean, Russia has, I don't know, 3,000 tanks or something. And what is his name? The defense minister, well, there's Reznikov, and then there's, why am I blocking his name? At any rate, he said we need 300 tanks. They might have gotten 12 or 14 so far. The tanks from the US won't be there for months, and then it takes 5 months to train someone to use them, and apparently some of them are next to impossible to maintain. I was reading, or maybe it was Scott Ritter who said, you need 3 gallons of diesel fuel to move the tank 1 mile. Now think about the energy shortages. I mean, it's absurd. It's a political ploy. And really, I think it's a kind of bribery, which turns my stomach, the sadism of it, which is, we're sending you, we're backing you up, so just keep dying for this initiative. You just keep out there and keep dying, and we'll be there right behind you.
And do you know the question I would love to ask Zelensky if I get a chance to have a one-on-one with him? Is he really actually thinking? It doesn't make sense that he would accept to be treated like a child, like you're treating a 5-year-old child, a 2-year-old child. Just be quiet, I'll give you a sweetie, and things will be fine, fully knowing that that's not the direction you're going. I just really wonder where his mind is right now. But one of the most discussed topics in relation to the aid the US and its allies are giving Ukraine, the Russian threat of nuclear escalation. Now, many people in the United States and in Europe have said they fear such a scenario is possible. But why do you think Russia can use the looming nuclear war narrative so effectively? How real is a nuclear threat?
Well, Russia had been very clear, which is that they will not use nuclear weapons unless there's an existential threat to their nation. The United States has been much less clear. I don't think Russia will initiate nuclear war. I think there's a greater danger of the West staging some false flag incident and then using that as a pretext for us to launch a nuclear war. Certainly, Russia would never launch a nuclear attack on Ukraine. They consider now a large part, or 20% of Ukraine has officially joined the Russian Federation. They consider the people of Ukraine cousins, brothers, they're intermarried. They would not do something like that on Ukraine. The places that are in danger, I would say, are the European capitals who are aiding them. I mean, you can't imagine how it must look to the Russians who the Soviet Union lost 27 million people to Adolf Hitler, to once again have German tanks deployed by neo-Nazi infested military brigades against Russia.
So let's talk about the money. I know that was one of the concerns that you've pushed. The money being spent on these armaments that are going to Ukraine, which honestly is just a useless kind of like effort in terms of defending themselves against Russia, if at all they're even doing that. But let's talk about the money spent. How much money has been spent there? Where is the money coming from? What exactly is happening?
Well, it's, I think, 112 billion from the US. I don't know how much from all the other places. Apparently, at least 70% of the money is not accounted for. I guess the Republicans in the Congress now are trying to find out about it. You may recall that Senator Rand Paul, a libertarian, Republican libertarian senator, had insisted on an inspector general, and he was basically shouted down by Senator Schumer. So I think a lot of it has gone to line the pockets of various political leaders. I mean, you have just massive corruption.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why the Ukrainians are underreporting the dead is that if they report to the family that their son or husband or uncle or whoever has been killed, they have to pay a bonus to that family.
All right.
So they don't report it. And in fact, there was a petition by, I think I heard in one place a figure of 300,000 wives, sisters, mothers to Zelensky saying, where are our people? You can't just say everyone is missing in action.
That's very interesting. I really wasn't aware of the fact that they had to pay a bonus to these people. But isn't it interesting, though? I think... All right, here's my question, Diane. So if they have to pay a bonus to these families and they're not telling the families that one of them or their beloved one is dead, there's so many Ukrainian soldiers that have died. And the so-called mainstream media has downplayed the numbers, and even the news, like not even really reporting on it. But then there has to be some reality effect to it. If you have not seen your loved one or heard of your loved one from your loved one for a very long time, doesn't that at least tell you that something is amiss? And so what is the responsibility then? Who's going to take account? That sounds like very draconian and autocratic, dictatorial to me of the Ukrainian government.
Well, you're right. And remember, this is a government that has banned at least 13 political parties. This is a government that's banned collective bargaining from the labor unions. And right at Christmas time, Zelensky started rounding up Ukrainian Orthodox priests. He stripped 13 priests of their citizenship in Ukraine, accusing them of being Russian collaborators, and had other people take over the churches so that their faithful could not even enter the churches during the Christmas season, if you can imagine.
Yes.
So
yes.
I would say, you know, I have a feeling that the Ukrainian model for democracy is what we may be practicing here in the United States, actually.
Wow. That really doesn't sound good. But anyway, speaking of Western support for the Ukraine finally got the 2 Leopard battle tanks that we're talking about, right, from Poland and Canada. I actually wanted to find out, what do you say people who believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin's aims are limited to Ukraine and that other countries are engaging in a type of like a red scare to say their democracies are at stake?
Well, look, you have to go back to 2014 at least, really farther. But remember, the Obama-Biden administration overthrew the elected government of Ukraine. And at that time, Crimea voted to leave and rejoin the Russian Federation, being largely Russian-speaking and part of Russia until 1954. So you had that, and then you had the regions of the Donbass, Lugansk, Donetsk, which wanted to join the Russian Federation, and Putin said no. Even though they were getting shelled and 14,000 people were killed for 8 years, he refused to allow them to join the Russian Federation. He said, we will work through the Minsk Accords. He had good faith that the leaders of the West were sincere. And now to have Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, and Boris Johnson all say, no, 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 the Minsk Accords were a total sham. We were just using it to buy time to train the Ukrainian army to go to war with Russia. Can you imagine the sense of betrayal?
Yeah.
And Putin actually had a meeting with family members of soldiers and apologized and said, I regret that I did not take action 8 years ago. I should not have believed these people. So if he had the intention of taking Ukraine and all of Europe, he could have done it starting then, but he didn't. He tried to abide by international law and a certain kind of negotiated standard. Now you have a problem because what would be the basis for telling him to negotiate with the West?
So the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine is coming up on the 24th of February. I'm correct in saying that, right? What are you expecting to see from Russia? I mean, we've been talking about people expect that the war will end by the end of the year, but come February the 24th, What are we expecting to see, either from Russia or Ukraine, on both sides?
Well, I don't know. I think Russia isn't really looking at it that way. They're trying to complete their mission. My understanding from people I've spoken with who read Russian or who've been in Russia is that the population there is very unified now. They may have not been so unified at the beginning, but they're very unified now because it's clear what they're fighting is really evil and really is a threat to Russia. The only, in fact, perhaps disagreement or not backing of Putin is the voices who wish that Putin would have been harsher or think he should be harsher now, who want much more aggressive, horrific action. He's not. He's doing everything in a very measured way, but they're going to carry out their mission, which is the denazification, demilitarization. And if there are no negotiations sooner, then provided we avoid nuclear war, the terms of negotiation will be on Russia's terms because they are the superior military power and they're going to defeat Ukraine.
I like what you say, they're going to defeat Ukraine. But how and when do you see this war actually coming to an end? I always ask this question particularly because I remember at the start of the Syrian war, we were right at the top of reporting about it. Would you see this ending? Would you see this ending? How do you think it's going to end? It's more than a decade, Diane. We're still talking about a Syria that is completely embattled and obliterated. So how do you see this war ending in Ukraine?
Well, I don't know. I can tell you Scott Ritter thinks that Russia will have completed their mission by August. Or so, late summer. He said that's the timing in terms of the various maneuvers Russia is doing. I wouldn't want to put a time on it because it's clear that what you have coming from the West is totally dishonest. So therefore, I think all kinds of manipulations are possible. I don't think Russia intends to be ensnared in this for that long. And they intend to win. That's what I'm saying. So I don't know. I don't know what other hideous monkey wrenches might be thrown in. I mean, look, we do have Liz Truss, the brief-termed British Prime Minister, who was texting Tony Blinken, it is done, minutes after the Nord Stream pipelines were blown up. And I have to say, I don't know what's wrong with these Europeans. Why would you want to be in an alliance that's going to, work with us, we'll cut off all your energy, you can starve and freeze to death this winter, all for the privilege of being a target in nuclear war if we have a war with Russia. I mean, I really don't understand what they see as their advantage in sticking with this unholy alliance. So I wouldn't care to predict the outcome. I think there's too many factors and there's too much treachery and dishonesty from the UK, the US, and NATO to predict what will occur.
All right, so let me take you back to the anti-war rally come February the 19th and all the politics at play in America. So a few things have happened. You spoke about how this anti-war rally will obviously address other issues apart from the war between Russia and Ukraine, addressing some political issues back home, that is in America. So it seems like the Biden administration is really embattled at this point in time. We have the Chinese big spy balloon that eventually was shot down. We have a President Trump who's also been commenting and issuing ultimatums when it comes to certain things playing out in the country. Now, also, America is looking forward to a 2024 presidential election. I don't know how to encapsulate all these things in one and just wonder how American people are feeling right now. But what is the mood really? The sense of belonging, the sense of trust or confidence in American politics?
I think most people, unfortunately, have just given up. They think it's hopeless. They don't bother to follow. They think there's nothing they can do. They've been completely removed from their place of having influence over the government. So that's what I would say is the overwhelming sense of people. It's really quite terrible.
But what is your take, Diane, on the spy balloon from the Chinese? It's like an increased threat staring right at the face of America.
The weather spy balloon. The shooting it down was completely absurd. It wasn't a threat. If China wants to spy on us, which I'm sure they are, we all spy on each other. They have satellites which are much more advanced, and they don't need a spy balloon. The Chinese said that it was a weather balloon that got caught in some wind thing and went astray. I read another accounting which strikes me perhaps as plausible, which is apparently Tony Blinken had announced he was planning to go to China.
Yes, he was.
They didn't want him to come. He wasn't invited. So how do you create the conditions? China, even now, they would be so, they don't want to slam the door in his face because then he would lose face. So they gave him a way to not come. That's one explanation. I don't know. So Tony Blinken, at any rate, the Chinese successfully survived not having Tony Blinken visit, which is probably a win for them.
Oh, well, that's a very good explanation I've heard so far, because I've also had to read through different explanations. But one very interesting one was the fact that it seems like the Chinese are just really rubbing egg in the face of the Biden administration, literally doing everything and anything they can that they wouldn't possibly do had it been a different president.
That's true. I'm sure that is true. I do think it's correct when Trump says that if he had been president, this would not have happened. You might remember that what he was impeached for was a phone call to Zelensky where he wanted an investigation of Hunter Biden's activities, and he was threatening to cut off weapons.
Yeah.
That was the impeachment. So, however, Trump's style of diplomacy, if you can call it diplomacy, it's more like business tactics, I'm not sure would work unless he does something in private other than his macho persona publicly. You're not going to threaten Putin. This is not a matter of Biden not having been tough enough. That's stupid. This is a matter of setting the whole thing up in the first place, which was done by Obama and Biden back in 2014. But I don't think this would be happening. You know, I'm concerned that Trump has some people around him who are virulently anti-Chinese, like Steve Bannon, who I think is a real problem. And China is not an enemy of the United States. It's a big mistake for people to think that. We better clean out this, what people call the deep state, the British Empire influence, Wall Street, the City of London. Those are the enemies of our republic. If we can get rid of that, then we'll see much more clearly who we can work with in the world.
Wow. All right. So we saw the Polish Prime Minister make some very interesting comments on, you know, people like your group going for an anti-war rally, people that are supporting Russia in this Russia-Ukraine war. Now, his comments are saying that what is happening right now is kind of like a disturbance for the formation of the New World Order. The New World Order, as we all know, is clearly a plan of the globalists. But he's part of the, you know, part of the European Union, and he comes out and he blatantly speaks like that he is part of prospering the agenda of the New World Order, and Putin is acting like a drug mafia because he feels that Europe is really relying on him. I mean, yeah, on him for energy. And it's like he's like a drug mafia that isn't when he wants, he can supply you with the drugs. And because you get addicted, you keep coming back to him. I found those rather very disturbing, but also very interesting. What's your take on those comments?
I don't know. Is he a drug addict?
I wonder.
Why would he?
I wonder.
You know, because this is certainly not Russia's approach at all. And I would say it could be the approach of the US or the British, but it's not really, because they insult you and they make you pay for it. They don't give you anything free at the beginning. It's all kind of brutality. It's also extremely naive. I mean, you would think that he would be wise enough to look at what's happening in Ukraine and reflect that the United States says, oh, yes, you're our ally. We're going to protect you. Now go and get everybody killed so that we can have our agenda, a war against Russia. I would be very leery of working with the United States right now. Everybody that supposedly is our ally, we're poking them in the eyes, kicking them in the groin, and then shutting off their electricity and food. So why would you want to be an ally of the United States or NATO or the UK?
Yeah, I really found that very interesting that he came out and made those comments. But before I let you go, Diane, we've seen the other anti-war rally protests also coming up in different countries, Nuremberg in Germany, other countries in Europe also joining up. You can see that definitely there's some groups within the European Union that are definitely are not for this war. Does this help as you also plan for February 19th that you have other countries, other people that actually share the same sentiments as you?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's really important for Americans because thanks to our news media, Americans tend to be very isolated. They don't think of the rest of the world, and knowing that there's solidarity with people all over the world would be really a great help. I think it's very important. If you don't mind, I'd like to just add one other issue.
Sure, go ahead.
Which is related, which is this earthquake that has struck Syria and Turkey with such devastating force. And we have sanctions, and we won't let up on these sanctions. And I think you see the total immorality of the collective West, in this case led by the United States with these Caesar sanctions, where Syria, I don't know what they're saying now, over 10,000 dead or something. I'm sure they're going to be finding more. They're not able to respond because of the sanctions and the restrictions, and then we're not even sending any aid. I mean, this is total hypocrisy, and I think that, again, should be a lesson to the leaders of Poland or any other nation that thinks that they have some kind of deal in working with us. It seems to me that China and Russia are much better partners. They're there, they're getting aid in immediately, they're doing what they can to help. But also, why don't people have infrastructure to withstand this? And that goes back again to this kind of economic apartheid policy, which has to be ended.
Wow. Okay, you just actually reminded me of one more question that I would love to ask you, Diane. Now, with all the funds that have gone into America, you spoke about billions of dollars from into Ukraine, rather, from America. Won't that have some sort of like a negative impact soon to come? Already America is talking about, you know, the whole inflation going on in the country. The cost of living has really changed for an average American. Now you've got billions going out of the country into a Ukraine war that is literally, if I could use the word, useless at this point in time. I don't know, what will be the effect of this? Money going out, citizens are really crying, the cost of living is high?
Well, many citizens are saying, you know, we had 17 people who died in a fire last year in the Bronx because they couldn't put a new boiler into the basement to heat the place. I know people in the public housing in New York City are saying, how can you be sending tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine when you're not fixing public housing for 400,000 residents? So there is this kind of outrage. Some Americans are also concerned about the debt. In my opinion, these questions of money per se get into trouble because money is, and certainly nowadays, is a fictitious instrument. It doesn't really mean anything since the dollar is no longer pegged to gold or anything solid, and we don't have a productive base that would back up confidence in it. It's not so much the question of money, but the policy of what you are trying to do with the money or how you're using it as credit. So it's certainly detrimental. You know, one thing I would urge people to consider, they say, oh, it's the military-industrial complex making all this money. Well, okay, sure. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and congressmen have stock in these companies, and, you know, they're making money, but wouldn't they also make money by building high-speed rail or nuclear power plants or modern water management? In other words, these companies could make as much money doing things that benefit the population. So it's really not about money per se, although for people on the lower level, there's plenty of corruption. But you really have an evil ideology at the top. And that's somehow what we really have to...
I totally agree with you. I really do. A total evil ideology right at the top, led by these globalists that are just so obsessed by controlling everybody on this earth. And I wonder how that will ever work. But see the course that they're, you know, the disturbances around the world that they're causing. All right, Diane, I really wish you all the best as you go for this February 19th anti-war rally in America. And I really pray that the effects of it, therefore, can be tangible. And let's send across that message, a very strong message, that people do not wish to have a war with Ukraine and either with Russia as well. So I know that you are running for the Senate still. And this time around, you've changed where you're going to be doing this?
Yes, well, Schumer is not up, right? The U.S. Senate terms are every 6 years.
Yeah.
So as much as I would love to challenge him again, the U.S. Senator who is up is Kirsten Gillibrand, who is also a rather corrupt person. She stays a little more behind the scenes. She came in when Hillary Clinton decided to run for president. And she is very involved in various of the cryptocurrency legislation. Right. She also, I think, is on the Intelligence Committee. She's been perhaps behind the scenes, but a very much supporter of the policy of arming Ukraine and so on, as all of them have. But it's not so much her, it's the position of U.S. Senate, because the Senate has a great deal of power in this nation. It was designed that way, and the state of New York is a very important state. Robert Kennedy was the senator from New York. And therefore, by running for this office, I'm hoping to provide some leadership and a standard of what actual leadership for a republic, a federal republic, should be, the United States, what should be the standard for our members of Congress and the Senate and the presidency. Because unfortunately, what I saw from the behavior of these people at the State of the Union last night was a terrible embarrassment. And I think Americans should be banging down the doors of their representatives and demanding that they shape up.
Honestly, I really support that. And I honestly hope for the best for you as you run in this race. And now, so let's make a deal. When you win, I'll visit America. Then you and I can do a nice exclusive. We can do a nice exclusive. We can tour America. We can speak to the people on the ground and see how we can best change people's lives. We've been praying for, inspiring leadership, if I must say. And if at all, the world needs inspiring leadership right now.
Yes, I agree.
All right. So all the best.
I'll take you up on that.
I'll remind you when you win and they announce your victory. I'll remind you. I'll say, Diane, I'm right here waiting for this. But thank you so much for joining me today on Worldview. And I will keep up with you to see, the developments as we go in America, in Europe, Russia, Ukraine, and we'll catch up again.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Diane. All right. So that was Diane Stia joining me today on the program. It's interesting to know what really is happening, behind the Ukraine-Russia war, and even the results of it that the media is really suppressing. I honestly think it's pathetic, to say the least. But in all this, like I have said time without number, again and again, it is the ordinary citizen that has to bear the brunt of this cruelty. I just showed you a video of young boys going into war. They're young children. They're supposed to be in school and not on a war field. What about the people that have lost their homes completely? Lest we talk about the lives lost. We need to continue praying for the nations. But that's all I have time for today on Worldview. Thank you for watching. I'm back again tomorrow, same time, as I continue to view the world.